Tēnā koutou. Thank you for joining us for this Back to Buildings webinar. Today's session is going to outline key considerations when reoccupying buildings after a lengthy period of no occupants. The challenge of getting buildings up and running again will be experienced by many organisations in the coming weeks as, fingers crossed, the country moves down alert levels. I'm Jacqueline Power from the Beca Southern Building Services team. I'm joined today by Steve Roscrooge and Nick McIntosh from the Beca Auckland Building Services team, and Emmett Mackel, Associate Director Facilities at the University of Auckland. Those of you here today bring different experience regarding building occupation and maintenance activities, and we may cover some items which seem rather obvious, particularly if you are from a facilities maintenance background. However, the purpose of today's webinar is to promote thinking around these considerations by all building stakeholders and prompt communication and processes to get underway to allow building reoccupation to go smoothly. A checklist will be available following the webinar to assist you with planning reoccupation activities. A bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available to view at a later date. When you leave the session, we would love to receive any feedback you wish to give. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity for our panel to answer your questions. Please submit questions via the Zoom Q&A function, and we will endeavour to answer as many as possible in the time we have. Before we get underway, it is important to touch on the overall health and safety aspects of bringing workforces back together in person. The Ministry of Health COVID-19 website is continuing to add to the information available to businesses to guide us all through this transition in a way that keeps our people safe. Local chambers of commerce and other industry organisations are also providing support in this area, and we encourage you all to seek whatever advice you need from the various support networks available. I'll hand over to Steve to begin the presentation.
Great, thanks Jacqueline. Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to start off and talk about HVAC systems and buildings. So now there's been a fair bit of information flying around online about potential virus transmission paths and the like, and I think the short story that we've got here is that it can't be ruled out. So a lot of guidance is currently coming from industry bodies internationally, and appears to be predominantly aimed at buildings being operated amidst a COVID outbreak, and perhaps not so much at the point of the curve that New Zealand seems to be on. However, there's some practical steps that can be taken to improve our indoor environments, so thought to help reduce the likelihood of transmission and generally create a healthy and comfortable environment for your people as they come back into your facilities. So just kicking off with air systems. So in terms of things that are worth looking into, so initially you'll want to flush the building with air. So this means running your outdoor air and exhaust or spill systems to move air throughout the building. The air will have sat for some time, obviously during lockdown. A particular note, if you've got a relatively new fit out, you'd notice things like your VOCs, your volatile organic compounds from carpet and joinery, adhesives and paint curing and the like as far as smells go, and that's not a great environment to be in. So you'd at least be wanting to freshen those things up as well. It's generally recommended from the likes of ASHRAE, SIBSI and REVA, who are various industry bodies, to increase both the rates of outdoor and extract air. So there'll be some energy penalty for this, but the potential health benefit gained with improved dilution is certainly worth it. It's also recommended that operational hours are extended, so start these systems earlier and finish them later, just to maximise that improvement of indoor air quality. There's some mixed suggestions that you may have heard. So I guess a couple of those. Some industry bodies are suggesting turning off recirculating systems, such as return air ducts on large centralised systems, or even on floor systems like fan core units, either turning them off or having them run continuously. Off on those obviously means discomfort, on continuously means spending some more energy. But I'll just go back to that point I made at the start. These appear to be based on operation amidst outbreaks. So I recommend you look at this on a case-by-case basis and just have a think about things with your personnel in mind. Just quickly on consumables and protection, so this is things like your filters and strainers. Suggest checking and cleaning and replacing these as you would per normal maintenance regimes. One thing that ASHRAE do recommend is increasing your filtration level, so using a higher grade of filter. Should your equipment or your fans be able to safely overcome that additional pressure that you'd see from that. So basically improving your filtration to pick up finer particles. It's not 100% effective unless you're looking at something that's more hospital grade, like filters and that sort of a thing, but it is an improvement on indoor air quality and can help. For water systems, this is your chilled water, heating hot water, condenser water systems. So a lot of this would depend on the treatment status pre and during COVID, or during the lockdown rather, and what state they've been left running in, whether they're circulating or stagnant. So in terms of bringing those back online, checking testing and dosing is certainly recommended, and if satisfactory results are not achieved, you may need to look into things like flushing. Something to consider perhaps is where you've got known, say, dirt pockets or low points within your building, if there's an opportunity to clean those out. Certainly doing that in advance of greater occupation would be beneficial. You know, it beats having to find a sticky control valve later on and dealing with that in an occupied space. Special note, I suppose, for cooling towers, so inspect these, check nothing is made at home within them during the shutdown period, or haven't accumulated debris, and the same there goes for other air-cooled plant. So look at cleaning and draining, check into your makeup water and dosage, and obviously treating to combat Legionella, given there's a chance that the water has stayed there or remained stagnant for a little while. I'll just get you to click over to the next slide, Jack, if that's okay. So basically, the things you need to think about are starting up. So I'll just get you to click one more just to show a capture that we've got from some monitoring of a building that we've done. If you just give that one more click, Jacqueline. Cool, there we go. So on the left there, you can kind of see on that top bar chart, there's some normal load profile day to day that's going on, and on the right it's just the next sort of screen along in terms of days. So you can see the sort of yellowy shaded area. That was that Monday that we were in level 2 for a day. The next 2 peaks are those days we were in level 3, and then level 4 beyond that. So you can basically see there the building is barely idling, so it's essentially hibernated. So I'll just get you to click one more then, Jacqueline, just to get back to that slide. So we need to think about what we're doing when we're turning things back on. So this means liven in stages. Don't do it all in one go. So be kind to your electrical system. And some things may be able to be enabled remotely via remote access BMS, but some may need to be sited in person to see if it's actually functioning. Changes in schedules can generally be done remotely on your BMS, but you may be needing to get in touch with your controls supplier if you're not familiar yourself, or specialized things in particular. Some systems have optimized starts and a self-learning functionality, and these may need to be reset. With winter coming up, you may need to change set points for heating modes if that's applicable for your type of system. Actually, I'll just get you to scroll back one slide if you don't mind, Jacqueline, just to bring up that log again. Yep, cool. So we'll touch on return plans later, but while the slide is up, if you have a monitoring system, then you can see what your normal trends were. So with people coming back to the office, you wouldn't be expecting to get to the same peaks as what you were seeing beforehand. But if we're in a new normal for an extended period of time, then there may be an opportunity to optimize what your energy consumption is, and obviously that has some impacts not only on the consumption of energy but your costs and carbon emissions as well. So some benefits to be had. Certainly the recommendation is proactive steps taken first, just to as best as possible make the environment safe. So I'll just that's it from the HVAC side of things. So I'll let Nick join in now.
Awesome, thanks Steve. So I'm going to talk about plumbing and drainage systems, for which in normal operation a building is consistently turning water over, and that ultimately prevents water stagnation. With buildings being left unoccupied, this turnover won't have been happening, and stagnant water can lead to a number of different issues within a system, which include bacteriological growth, pathogen and biofilm growth, as well as leaching of heavy metals such as copper or lead into water supplies, which can create health and safety risks if that water is consumed. Now, at a minimum, and per MB guidelines that were released about a week ago, water supplies should be flushed in their entirety to turn the system over. And while doing this will purge the system of stagnant water, it may not be enough to remove harmful bacteria from the system. And depending on the size and complexity, you may also want to consider having both the water and water outlets, such as taps, sampled for bacteria and then disinfect the system as required. It's important to note that this is not nearly as invasive or time-consuming as it may sound, but you do need to be factoring these sorts of things into the time it takes to prepare a building for reoccupation. Now, hot water systems need special consideration with regards to Legionella control, which will require turning water over within the system, as well as thermally shocking the system. And so things to consider here around whether you have central hot water or local hot water generation, or perhaps a mixture of both, as well as the circulating temperature of ring mains in a central hot water system, as some ring mains will operate above 60 degrees and others will operate between 50 and 60, and that could impact the time that it takes, or will impact the time that it takes to kill Legionella. Looking at water seals on drainage systems. So fundamentally, seals prevent foul air from the sewer entering a building, and they're typically maintained by occupants just using plumbing fixtures. So you don't actually need to think about them the majority of the time. However, it's likely with buildings being unused that these water seals will have been depleted, and that will allow foul air into the building. And so it's important to run water through them to replenish those water seals before people reoccupy the building. And it's also important to consider health and safety requirements that may be needed for people performing that task, as they'll potentially be exposing themselves to that foul air. One thing that I'd really like to shine a spotlight on here around floor gullies and tun dishes that serve mechanical equipment, as these typically don't have fixtures charging their water seals, and they're in back of house areas that people are not normally occupying. They will need to be specifically identified and replenished. And one of the reasons why this is really important is that they could be serving equipment such as air handling units, which could be drawing air from the same room that depleted water seal is in. And so if that situation exists or something similar, the air handling unit could actually draw sewer gases from that depleted trap and then pull it into the air conditioning system and distribute it throughout the building. So moving on to system complexity and ownership structure. If we take a look at differing ends of the spectrum, so at one end of the spectrum, we could have, as an example, a standalone retail tenancy, which may have a WC, a wash hand basin, and a kitchenette. And in isolation, it's a relatively simple system to flush through. But if we took that retail tenancy and put it into a shopping centre, it becomes a lot more complex, both in system infrastructure within the building to get water to all of the tenancies, as well as the strategy required to flush that system correctly. But it also presents a system ownership interface between landlord and tenant, where while the system is technically one system, it could have different entities who own different parts of it. So if this interface exists both in other systems such as mechanical and in a number of different buildings like commercial offices, it will potentially require coordination between a number of different parties, which could include building owners, tenants, facilities management teams, maintenance staff, plumbing or mechanical contractors. And as always, we're here to help as you feel necessary. And so I will now pass you back to Steve. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nick. So as touched on, there's some specifics that will go into your plan in terms of reoccupation that will have impacts on your building systems. Just a few things up on the screen there. So some of the things really to think about is planning with reduced occupancy or splitting shifts and the like, and how that might impact your plant, your lighting, your security schedules. They may need to be changed, and certainly in terms of livening the building. Again, there's a lot of factors to look into. Nick and I have covered off some specific details on the HVAC side of things around some practical measures that could be undertaken, predominantly that assist with the health and well-being in terms of occupants entering the building. There's certainly more systems than just those that we've covered so far. So I'd just like to hand over to Emmett from the University of Auckland, who will share some of the thinking and actions underway that they have across their campus.
Thanks, Steve. So yeah, I'll just like to show you this campus map here, which is the city campus for the university. We've got 4 larger campuses and then a number of remote sites as well. But this is our city campus, and you can see there's we've color-coded our buildings. So even during alert level 4, we had a number of buildings that were actually being used. Those are the red ones there, the category 1, and you can see many of those actually had cooling towers and emergency generators. So that they were being fully maintained. The types of activities going on in there were research activities for COVID-19. So those are permitted under that alert level. The orange coloured buildings, there's a few of those. Those were support type buildings, so they may have had emergency generators or power systems or data centres that were assisting with those other activities going on. The yellow buildings were those that were effectively mothballed. So those buildings were shut down, and we're in the process at the moment of bringing them back online in preparation for level 2. And the purple buildings are those that we've got for student accommodation. So we've had about 1,800 students on campus. Many left around when COVID-19 kicked off, but we still have about 1,800 on campus. So we've got a number of buildings that we're still having to maintain, keep operational. And then there's probably being another 300 to 400 staff across the university who are involved with activities and buildings, and those are the ones that we've had to keep going in that red category there. So just moving on to the systems that we're dealing with. So as Nick and Steve have talked about, they've talked about the air systems and the plumbing systems. There's a number of others that we've had to factor in, like fire and lifts, electronic security systems, even things like autoclaves for sterilisation, cooling towers, obviously. Other things that come up, obviously, waste management. So some of the waste management hasn't been able to take place, and we've got general waste and hazardous waste that needs to be kicked off. So quite a few of these things, including grounds, ground staff have to come back and prepare the grounds, make them safe, ready for people to come on campus. There's been a lot of debris over the 4, 6, 8 weeks where people haven't been around cleaning things up, and obviously cleaning is a big one to kick off and have running. So with about 2,000 to 3,000 people around the university, we've still got quite a bit of activity and things that we have to look after. Just thinking about coming back though, so when you think about going and getting your hair cut in level 2, everyone can't go to the hairdresser all at the same time. So the contractors are the same. They're all going to be wanted in high demand at the same time by building owners. So we've come up with a bit of an onboarding plan around which essential services, which essential systems will be coming on first. And you can see that it takes a wee while. On the right-hand side there, we're talking about opening up in different phases. Some of our essential buildings, obviously they're first with essential teams, but it can be up to 15 days, depending on the priority that we've given to some buildings. So it's not necessarily a very quick thing to it's not like getting in your car and driving off. It actually takes a wee while, as Nick and Steve have described. There's quite a few things that need to be done. Some of the other things that we have to do for our staff and students is actually just check that they've got their risk assessments done, but particularly around activities that are now going to start happening in level 2. So risk assessments, we've provided some guidance and templates that the teams can use to just have a look at what their activities might involve around risk of COVID-19, plus the safety plans that go with those. One of the things that people are finding quite helpful is we've got an FAQ system running, so that we actually put up questions that people may ask. They can go to the internet and find them, or intranet for the university, and find out answers for those ahead of time. There's loads of questions coming around. What's cleaning going to look like? You know, should I get in a lift with somebody else? What happens with visitors? How do I track and trace? You know, can I come and retrieve belongings? So there's all those sorts of questions that people are likely to have, and it's quite good if you can be ahead of the curve and just be thinking about FAQs for those. So yeah, I'll hand back to Jacqueline.
Thanks, Emmett, and thanks to all of our panel for their insights. As we've heard, there are a number of things to consider and plan before reoccupying a building. What each building requires will be slightly different, and some buildings have more stakeholders than others who need to be involved. So we've had a couple of questions during the webinar that we'll tackle now in the minutes we've got left. So the first one, I think this is one for you, Steve. Perhaps to just elaborate on something we've touched earlier. Will my building still work effectively with a reduced occupancy?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jacqueline. So obviously your building and your systems are typically set up to maintain overall comfort conditions and achieve efficiency, depending on what main sort of drivers are. So certainly they're capable of operating in part load. There'll be certainly wouldn't be expecting, say, you know, just arbitrarily, say if you had 50% of your staff back, that you'd have 50% of the energy costs. It's probably not quite linear like that. So I think what I was alluding to before is if we're in a sustained period where we have reduced occupancy, there may be opportunity to say, you know, some of the advice is around, say, turning your outdoor air systems to maximum, or maybe you don't have to go quite to maximum and look at it on achieving a higher level but per person basis, and just a bit of a refinement. Obviously everything's a bit tough financially at the moment, so looking at ongoing operational costs and energy use, I think is prudent if we're in this for the long haul.
Thanks, Steve. Another one here, I think, Emmett, this would be best for you to tackle perhaps. Question around the utilisation of access control as a way of tracing where people have been and who's been present.
Yes, so there's been quite a heavy reliance on access control system reporting. We find that we've been able to satisfy the ministry's requirements around that. But what we have done as well is made sure that there are some manual systems where needed for certain laboratories, that the time that people were in there coming and going. We've also got a web application that the university's developed where when we get to level 2, we'll be asking people to log an entry each time they enter a building. So while we have our buildings locked, internally within buildings, some of them are quite large, we're asking people to just nominate in the spaces where they've been spending a fair bit of time, perhaps in a study area or those sorts of spaces as well, just to help us get a bit more finer reporting on those activities, mainly because if we do get a positive COVID-19 on campus, potentially we could be shutting down large parts of the university, and we don't want to do that. So the best information we've got for track tracing is obviously going to contain that a lot more.
Thanks, Emmett. Here's a question in general about building services systems that have been that require ongoing testing or building warrants of fitness impacts. Steve or Nick, either one of you, would you like to comment on any specific requirements that we should be thinking about as we return to buildings regarding those systems?
I think I can chime in there just quickly, I suppose, about life safety systems and that sort of thing. So the types of specified systems that building warranted fitness addresses. So certainly ahead of occupation, anything that was due to be inspected, if it hasn't been as an essential kind of service over the period, then certainly you'd be looking to engage with the providers to make sure that that's done before we occupy. You know, there's things that are just absolutes that we should make sure are in a healthy state or go through their processes, and thinking of things like emergency lighting and the like. So if testing of those are overdue, then I'd be certainly looking to get those things back up to date prior to occupation.
Thanks, Steve. So that's covered off the questions that have come through during the session, and we are getting pretty close to time. So thank you all very much for your attendance today, and many thanks to our panel. It's great to have them here to share their expertise. We are here to support our industry colleagues in whatever way we can. So let's stay in touch in the coming weeks and months as we navigate through the various changes and challenges that we're all going to experience. So thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed the content.
Thanks everyone.